And welcome to noise11.com, American Caterpillar tractor driver Buzz Throckman.
That's him. Who would have thought?
I never knew that name came with that description.
Yeah, American Caterpillar tractor. And the other Throck was Troy McThrock, who was a Playboy millionaire out in the South Pacific on his yacht. And it was part of a series of names with the word Throck in them that a friend of mine and I stumbled on in a very, very, I would say a haze of marijuana in Copenhagen in 1976. We'd just visited Christiana, which is a little hippie community in Copenhagen, and we'd found ourselves a rather large block of hash. And we went back to the hotel and had smokes that were so thick with hash that they wouldn't burn. And when we were really, really out of it, we just started making up names. And one of them was Troy McThrock. And then I made up Buzz Throckman. And before the end of the night, we had a whole list. We had Angus McThrock, the wily old doctor. We had Piet van Throck from Holland. We had Bishan Throckaputa, the Pakistani wicketkeeper. So we had all of these names with Throck in them. Why, I don't know. I just liked the name Throck. So I became Buzz Throckman when I joined the Angels.
Well, Buzz Throckman had a very short music career. One album, wasn't it? One album.
Well,
and that album didn't do very well. The next album did. So, it was a good idea to kick him out of the band and get you in.
Get rid of this guy Throckman. He was no good. It's really funny because when I did that, my parents were actually overseas at the time, and Mum came back and she said, "What's the matter? Don't you like your name? Why have you put that silly name on the record?" And I said, "Well, it was just a bit of fun." So the next record, I think Face to Face, I'm Graham Bidstrup, and then in No Exit, I'm Graham Buzz Bidstrup, because people, when Face to Face came out, said, "Where's Buzz? Has he left?" And I go, no, it's me. It's the same guy, I just haven't got long hair and hippie beads. I've just now got short hair and a black leather jacket on.
So you've had 3 names on 3 albums. Can you then get inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame 3 times as 3 different people?
What I'm hoping. That's what I'm hoping for. If I can get famous enough, I just might be able to do it.
So a lot of these stories, this is the book, No Secrets, and it's a very big book.
It's a substantial tome, I would say.
There's a lot to read in here, but I can't understand how you would be able to chop out anything, because I've known you a very long time, and this book surprised me with the number of things in here that I did not know about you.
There you go. I mean, I've been under the radar in a lot of it, in studios and I guess the work I do now, or have done for the last 20 years for Jimmy Little Foundation and Uncle Jimmy Thumbs Up. That's something that I do outside of the music business, so it's been, I guess not as publicized as well. And a lot of the music that I did in the 80s, after I left the Angels, was as a session player. So a lot of it, things like Mondo Rock's Chemistry, JJ Hackett joined after they made that record. So nobody really knew I'd played on it because they assumed that JJ Hackett had played on it. Same with Reckless for Australian Crawl, because Watto joined straight after I'd done that record. So people assumed that it was Watto on the record, but it was actually me. So yeah, a few times I guess I didn't publicize the fact that I was doing so much work.
Yeah, I had no idea that you were the drummer on Reckless and, all those Jimmy Barnes records.
Yeah, on Soul Deep. I did the live Soul Deep, not the record. But the funny one being Flesh and Wood, when he did the live one of that, he said to me, "Hey, come on, play some congas." And I said, "Mate, I don't play congas. Like I'm not a hand drummer, right?" He said, "Yeah, I will shake a tambourine, shake a shaker and a tambourine and sing some backups, So I get to the studio and I find that everybody is sitting down because it's unplugged. So everyone is sitting down except me. I'm standing like a giraffe at the back with a set of congas that I don't know how to play, and a shaker and a tambourine. But it was the only time that I've ever been the only person standing when I'm usually the only person sitting.
So Don Walker says at the beginning of the book that you've lived enough to fill several lives, and I concur with Don on that statement.
Yes, and a few of them have been probably a little more enjoyable than others.
So this book started out before COVID, actually.
Yeah, it did. It started out as a niece and a nephew one time saying to me, "Just what do you do?" Like, my parents say that you play in bands. Well, I can see that, but you make records, and what do you do when you're sitting in a studio? And so I just thought I would start writing down what I could remember, while I could still remember it, about the things that I've done. And fortunately, I could remember a lot. I hadn't killed my brain cells in the early days, which is good. So yeah, I just wrote it all down, basically telling myself stories, about I remember that thing there, and by the time I'd finished, I had, like I said to you earlier, like 400,000 words, which is 4 books of stories, and then I was trying to work out what the hell I was going to do with it, whether I break it in half and I'd self-publish it or I'd do something, I don't know. And then I showed it to a dear friend, Jen Jewel Brown, who's a published author herself, and also a very, very dear friend I've known for 50 years actually, who used to go out with Don Walker. That's where I met Jen. And I showed it to her one night, and she said, "Oh, that's actually really good. You should consider making that into a proper memoir." And I said, "Oh, look, I really don't know what to do about that." And she said, "Well, I'll help you." So over a year, she sort of helped me. This is during COVID. She sort of helped me pare it down, I think, to about 150, 160,000 words. And then I ran into another friend of mine who I went to primary school with, who writes military history. He's probably one of the Australia's most notable military history writers. His name is Peter Brune, and I showed it to him, and he said, "Oh, mate, I really like that. That's great. I could suggest maybe you do that, 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 and that." And between him and Jen and myself, we managed to whittle it down, and here's what we've got now: 120,000 words, whether you like it or not.
You started an interesting time, New York in 1980. You're with Cameron Allen, who was the guy one of the co-founders of Regular Records and produced
Mm,
Mental, Snips Are Getting Bigger and whatever. You're on tour with the Angels in America, supporting the Kinks, and got dumped from the tour.
yes.
It's an interesting starting point for the book.
Well, it was pretty much my little turning point. I'd been 5 years with the Angels, not really thinking at the time when I joined the band. I called myself Buzz Throckman. I obviously didn't think I was going to stay that long, and I explained that in the book actually. But yeah, after 5 years, I found myself in America on a tour bus, making $20 a day, with the prospect of basically starting again. So the Angels got to America. Yes, we had a couple of bits and pieces, a couple of places where it went well. Pacific Northwest, Portland, Seattle, Vancouver was really good. But we were faced with the prospect of having to stay to basically work in America for probably the next 3 to 5 years, like AC/DC did, to get to get to where we wanted to get to, which was basically have a career in America. So I found myself sitting in a room at the Gramercy Park Hotel one night, and Cameron Allen turned up, and I knew Cameron from Regular, like you said, but I actually made the demos that got Flowers their gig, their deal with Regular. So I'd done these demos at Albert's with Flowers, and that got them their deal. So Cameron just said to me, "So what's been going down?" And I said, "Mate, I've been traveling around here. I'm making $20 a day. The band is nearly $400,000 in, advances to Epic Records. So nearly $500,000 in 1980 that we have to earn back before I'd make 1 cent." And I said, "Yeah. And if we'd sold 4.5 million records, then our managers probably made $500,000, and each of the three major songwriters probably made $500,000. So there's something wrong here." And he said, "Well, I'm making 6 films next year, and I know that you engineer, you play keyboards, you play drums, you play guitar. I'll pay you obscene amounts of money, and we'll have lots of fun. What do you reckon?" And I went, "You serious?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah, serious." So the next day, I was on the bus on the way to Philadelphia, I think, with the band, and something just hit me, and I just went, "You know what? I think I've had enough." And I went down and told the Brewster brothers, who weren't particularly interested. And he said, "So you're just going to walk out or say?" And I said, "No, I won't do that. I'll wait till you find another drummer." I told Doc. He was concerned. He thought that I might have just been flipping out a bit. Chris was really angry with Chris Bailey. He said, "So you're going to leave me, you bastard? Just going to leave me, are you?" And I said, "No. Look, because Chris and I had talked about leaving quite a few times. I got to tell you, when things got a little bit tough, and again in Australia, I made the point to the band and to the management, or to the other three, that unless we had some kind of a songwriting split that enabled the people who were making money to split a bit back to the people who weren't making money, I didn't think it was particularly fair, and I wasn't sure whether I could continue on. And really, I'd say to their detriment, to be honest, they didn't say, well, here's a little, here's 5%, which is bugger all, to be honest, but here's something for you to stay here and start again in America. And I think I would have had that been available. I would have stayed with the band probably and given it a shot. And I think the Angels would have made it. I really do. I think if we'd stayed there and worked hard, which would have been every night of the week driving around America, we would have made it. But that wasn't to be. They didn't see that.
You did have one successful song, No
I
Secrets, which
did.
you co-wrote with Doc.
With Doc, and that gave me the title of the book. I only wrote it so I could write a book 40 years later, you know.
That makes
Um,
sense.
it makes sense, yeah. Look at that. That was a wonderful thing. Doc and I always had a great friendship, and he was coerced into not writing with me, I think. I think that it was Brewster, Nice and Brewster, and that's the way that they wanted it. And when Doc eventually did come round to my house one day, and I just played him this melody that I'd been mucking around with, and he just got out his book, because all good songwriters have got a book, but got out a book and he said, "Hang on a minute, I reckon these words that I wrote just the other day, I reckon they'll fit with that," and he just sang it out, and it fitted 100% perfectly. And the only change that was made to it was Rick suggesting to stagger the she keeps no secrets, because the line that I had was more of a backing vocal. And that was, his idea was great. It was a really good idea. But yeah, but it was basically this set of lyrics that Doc had written about a girl that he gave a lift to, and her name was Amanda, and she was an actress, and she poured out her heart in this short drive. He dropped her off wherever she was going, went round the corner, got out his notebook, and wrote down everything he could remember about Amanda, the actress, and that's the lyric.
Wow. This would have been around 1980, I guess, maybe
That's
1979.
79.
Yeah. Okay.
79, actually.
Let's go back 14 years then. I love the story about young Graham on his push bike going around to a hotel because he thinks the Rolling Stones are going to be there. And Charlie is out the front
Yep.
uh, with Brian Jones and Bill Wyman, and you get to meet them.
I get to meet them. It was a surreal moment, and it was at a time when I didn't know how to act around, pop stars or rock stars or anything. I just rode my bike straight up to Charlie Watts, face to face with him, and I said, "Hey, I'm a drummer too. I want to be in a band just like you." And he said, "Well, really? Oh, okay. Well, you keep practicing and you'll get there." And I was sort of looking at them all, and Keith and Mick were up on the first floor balcony. And you got to understand, this was a very, very small suburban motel that they'd put the Rolling Stones in because they didn't want another Beatles incident in the city where there was 100,000 people, right? So they put them in this tiny little motel, which happened to be round the corner from where I lived. So, I was just standing there looking at him, and I said to Bill Wyman, "I really like 12 by 5." And he looked at me and he went, how do you know about that record? It's only just been released. And I said, yeah, my sister's friend had it the other day. My sister's 6 years older than me. So my sister's friend had it and she didn't like it, but I love it. And I just rattled off all the names of the songs. And he's just looking at me going, "How old are you?" And I told him, and they went, how do you know about this? And they had a bit of a chuckle, and that was kind of it. And I just said, oh, well, see you later, and off I went.
I love how the connections work with this band, with other bands. You were a friend of Chris Bailey way before you both joined the Angels. Chris
Yes.
joined a band with Bon Scott. Bon was the guy that gets you into Albert's. There's connections all along the way.
It really was just shall I say, serendipitous thing, that I knew Bon not that well, but I knew him. I knew him through Chris. Chris was in the Mount Lofty Rangers with Bon, and also Glenn Shorrock was in that band as well in Adelaide. But I knew them enough to when I was living in London when AC/DC did their first gig at the Red Cow. I was actually there, and much to the amazement of the friends that were there with me, I just walked up to Bon at the end of the show and said, "Hey man, how you doing?" And he said, "Hey, yeah, good to see you." And the obvious question, "You got any pot?" And I said, "Well, I think I can find some." We went back to our place. We drank, we laughed, we smoked, and during that conversation, it was really about Bond saying, "Well, so what are you doing musically?" And I said, "Well, I'm working in a bedding warehouse at the moment because that's the only way I can make money. I haven't got a drum kit, I haven't got a car. I'd done one audition with a band called Diversions that had a singer named Lena Lovage, who I didn't know at the time was going to have a number one hit a year, about 2 years later. So I didn't join that band, which was probably a mistake. Who knows? But Bond just said, look, if you want to, if you're thinking about going back to Australia, there are gigs everywhere. Like people are playing 5 nights a week. There's a whole circuit. And I said, really? Like when I left, it was all disco and denim and stuff. And he said, no, it's really good. So I just thought I'd come back to Adelaide, make enough money to go back to London or maybe go to New York. I had this sort of bee in my bonnet to go to CBGB's. And I got back there, and then lo and behold, I got this call from an agent, Robbie Robertson, his name was, not the guy from the band, but the guy that manages the Theberton Town Hall now. And he just said to me, yeah, there's this band from Sydney. They're signed to Albert's. They're being produced by Vander and Young. They're looking for a drummer. And I went, man, that sounds like fun. That sounds cool. Who is it? So I'll just come in. And I walked in, and there was the Keystone Angels or the Moonshine Jug and String Band, whoever you want to associate it with, sitting in the room. And I said, oh, what are you guys doing here? And they said, oh, we're the band that's looking for a drummer. And I went, oh, really? Really? The Keystone Angels? Okay. And that was really why I called myself Buzz Throckman, to be honest. I explain it in the book because nobody knew I'd come home from England, and I didn't want anyone to know I joined the Keystone Angels.
Yeah, so you got Chris Bailey into the band then.
I did. So I told the band I would give them 6 months, 6 months trial, and I came to live in Sydney. And within about 3 months, they said they wanted to go into the studio to do some demos. And I'd written a few songs. I'd written two with John, one with Doc and John and Rick. And they said, if you want to go in to record, you have to sign these pieces of paper. And they got presented to me at Checkers, backstage at Checkers, and I was pissed and stoned. And I looked at these pieces of paper and I just went, oh, yeah, okay. And I signed away all my rights in the songs that I'd write for the next 5 years at 50-50. And I signed away, well, I just, signed a recording contract without even reading it, which was probably a mistake again. And went in and recorded the stuff, went back and listened to it because I had a tape recorder I'd bought back from England. Went back to Doc's place because I was living with Doc at the time, staying at his place. We listened to it, and I just said to him, "Man, the bass isn't quite working here with the drums," and he would tell me. He told me about how he'd studied drama and acting. And I said, "Have you ever thought about being a front man?" He said, "Well, who would play bass?" I said, "Oh, we could get a bass player, and you could be the front guy." So we had a meeting with the band, and John Brewster, who he will corroborate this, said that, "Well, I think I've got a better voice than Doc." And I said to him, "You may have a slightly better voice, but you don't look like that guy. Like this guy here is a front man. You're not. And if we're going to do something, he should be the front man, and we'll get a bass player. And they said, oh well, who would we get? And I said Chris Bailey, and they said he won't leave Adelaide for us, because Chris was very vocal about. When I joined the Keystone Angels, he said, "That bullshit, mate. They ain't gonna make it. You're just gonna come home with egg on your face, blah blah." So I rang up Chris and I said, "Hey, there's something about this band that is worth investing in. Come, do you want to have a shot at it?" And he said, "Yeah, all right," and he came over and totally transformed the band. Doc was amazing out the front. Not immediately. I've got tapes of Doc out the front where he's like this ringmaster. Hey everybody, there's two girls sitting over there by themselves. So there's a couple of guys over here. You should come and talk to these guys. He's doing all of that kind of stuff. But when the whole band developed the sound that we put down on Face to Face, I think we made the right decision for sure.
There's so many parts of your career. We've spent a lot of time talking about the Angels,
Yeah.
recording with Tiny Tim, the Sweet and Sour TV show. What else we got here? Oh, your time with the Party Boys.
Yes.
Now,
Yes,
I might leave all those things for people to go out and get the book to find out.
Look,
Let's jump.
Plenty to find out.
Yeah, let's jump to GANGgajang, which is probably the longest job you've ever had.
I think it is. 40 years this year since the release of our debut album. And Mark was around here yesterday, actually, and we were sort of chatting about we're doing some gigs just to sort of, support the fact that the album's been out for 40 years. But that was a band, and it's really interesting because we started that band. We called it GANGgajang for a reason, and gajang's the sound of a guitar, gajang, gajang. But the gang part of it meant that we all acknowledged that we didn't have to sign a piece of paper that we were married to this band, and this is the only thing we could do. Because in the Angels, when Chris and I got asked to do a record with Air Supply as a rhythm section, the band, the Angels, said, "You can't do that. We can't have our rhythm section playing for Air Supply." And I said, "Why not? I mean, we're a rhythm section, but you're part of the Angels. You can't do that." So GANGgajang was set up as a band that may be together for a year, it may be together for 5 years, who knows? Doesn't matter. We'll just make a record and see what happens. And that's 40 years later, and we're still the same band, apart from dear Chris, who's passed away, but it's the same band. And my wife Kay, who sometimes gets up and sings, but she got wise really early.
But it's a real testament to you as a songwriter that two of the greatest Australian songs of all time, No Secrets by the Angels and Sounds of Then by GANGgajang, are part of the Australian music culture now.
They are, and I wish I'd co-written. I wish I'd co-written Sounds of Then, but that's one of Mark's. But I had a lot to do with the recording of that. I quite happily put my hand up and say I was behind the desk for a lot of that. I did a lot of the production. I played 8 guitars on it, like all the rhythm guitars on that are me, and I mixed it with Dave Nicholas at Rhino. So yeah, I had a lot to do with the sound of that record, and I'm really proud of that. And I love the fact that GANGgajang has got that song. When we go to Brazil, which we did last year, our 4th tour of Brazil, our big song over there is "Give Me Some Lovin'."
Oh,
It's
wow.
not Sounds of Then. Yeah, "Give Me Some Lovin'." And the other song that's really big over there is "Hundreds of Languages." So, we've got 2 different songs over in Brazil that are our big ones.
So if GANGgajang is the longest job you've ever held down, I guess the most passionate job you ever had was working with the iconic Jimmy Little.
Absolutely. Like I spent 13 years, the last 13 years of his life as his manager. And in that 13 years, I not only got to witness firsthand a privileged witnessing of this, of what was happening in remote communities. We did a lot of travel. Jimmy was an ambassador for literacy and numeracy for the federal government, so they would fly him out to different communities to do, talk at schools to kids about the importance of staying at school. So I saw what was happening in these communities, and I got to meet pretty much every significant elder or traditional owner, because they all would come out to see Jimmy. I mean, Jimmy had been traveling to these places since the 1960s, so everyone wanted to see Jimmy, and I'd be with him, and Jimmy would just turn around and go, "Oh, this is my friend Buzz," and wouldn't say manager, wouldn't say it. Just here's my friend Buzz. So I immediately got this a golden ticket into knowing these people, which when we started the Jimmy Little Foundation and now Uncle Jimmy Thumbs Up, I've got a beautiful network all around Indigenous Australia of people who obviously know me through Jimmy Little, but the strange thing is that a lot of people know me through the Angels, because the Angels were really, really, really popular in Indigenous world. Lots of Indigenous players, in their 50s and 60s, play Angel songs. So when it's like, oh, by the way, he was the drummer of the Angels too, and he co-wrote that song, and people, oh, you're kidding. So it's been a wonderful thing, and that's now half that length of time that I've been in GANGgajang is 25 years now, a quarter of a century I've been working in Indigenous Australian communities and in that space.
Well, I'll leave it to your final words to end off the interview. From the Angels to GANGgajang to Jimmy Little and a whole host of playing, writing, productions and the artist management projects, I look back on my life with both awe and satisfaction. My path has been sunlit by so many beautiful people I've worked with, and I'm thankful for the knowledge I've gained and every friend I've made along the way. Beautiful words. You've probably written your own epitaph.
Well, the thing is that you get to the end of this thing, and like you say, there's so many different little twists and turns in this book, and people that I've worked with, and it's all seemed to happen, uh, not by accident, but just things just happen. If you're in the right place at the right time, and also if you're receptive to things happening and not closed off, then wonderful things happen. And I am really, really. I'm very thankful for the career I've had, and I've met some beautiful people, and I still see them to this day, and and I love meeting new people. So this is a good way to meet more people.
Well, you've documented a fantastic part of Australian music history and culture in the book No Secrets, Graham Buzz Bidstrup, as opposed to Buzz Throckman, who was never heard of again after that first Angels album.
No, I did notice on Facebook somebody has put up a Facebook as Buzz Throckman, and I'd like to find out who the hell that is, because it ain't me.
Great to talk to you, Buzz. Thanks for
Thanks,
joining us
Paul.
in News 11.
Pleasure.